श्री परमात्मने नमः। ओम श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः। कृष्णं नारायणं वन्दे, कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुम्, कृष्णं द्वैपायनं वन्दे, कृष्णं वन्दे पृथासुतम्। सच्चिदानन्दरूपाय विश्वोत्पत्त्यादिहेतवे तापत्रयविनाशाय श्रीकृष्णाय वयं नुमः। सर्ववेदान्तसिद्धान्त गोचरं तमगोचरम् गोविन्दं परमानन्दं सद्गुरुं प्रणतोऽस्म्यहम्। Dear Divine Selves, today I am beginning a new series of these courses on Bhagavad Gita as viewed by Swami Vivekananda. How Swami Vivekananda was influenced by Srimad Bhagavad Gita, and during his various lectures across the world, he commented upon some of the verses of the Bhagavad Gita. He hasn't spoken or given any systematic commentary on Bhagavad Gita, despite being one of the most devout Advaita Vedanti and one of the greatest monks of modern India. But Advaita Ashram of Sri Ramakrishna Mission has published a small book based on various comments during his entire lectures, selected from complete works of Swami Vivekananda on selected verses of Bhagavad Gita. So let's see how Swami Vivekananda viewed Bhagavad Gita. It's said that during his Parivrajak life, Swami Vivekananda carried only 2 books with him, and Bhagavad Gita was one of them. The second one was The Imitation of the Christ. So, let me introduce to you as to how Swami Vivekananda viewed the greatest canonical text of Hinduism, that is Bhagavad Gita. In fact, Bhagavad Gita is one of the Prasthantrayas, that is the canonical texts, Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutra are regarded as the foundational texts of Sanatana Dharma or Hinduism. So, of these three, Swami Vivekananda profusely used to quote Upanishads. In fact, he said, and I quote, that I have never ever quoted anything but Upanishads. But Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutra are essentially in their message one, because they are part of the Prasthantraya canonical texts of Hinduism, and Bhagavad Gita is regarded as the quintessence of Upanishads. In fact, a commentary, the greatest commentary on the Upanishads. So let's now see as to how Swami Vivekananda viewed Bhagavad Gita, the song celestial, the song divine of Lord Krishna. The book published by Advaita Ashram of Sri Ramakrishna Mission is titled as Bhagavad Gita as viewed by Swami Vivekananda. So this course series on this I would like to call Bhagavad Gita, Swami Vivekananda on Bhagavad Gita. So today's discourse and lecture is on the introduction of Bhagavad Gita by Swami Vivekananda. The Gita and other scriptures. How Swami Vivekananda viewed Bhagavad Gita in comparison to the other scriptures. The Bhagavad Gita, most of you perhaps have read it. It is the best commentary we have on the Vedanta philosophy. The Bhagavad Gita is the best authority on Vedanta. The only commentary, the authoritative commentary on the Vedas has been made once and for all by Him, the Lord, who inspired the Vedas, by Krishna in the Gita. It is there for everyone in every occupation of life. Than the Gita, no better commentary on the Vedas has been written or can be written. The essence of the Shrutis or of the Upanishads is hard to be understood, seeing that there are so many commentators, each one trying to interpret in his own way. Then the Lord Himself comes, He who is the inspirer of the Shrutis, to show us the meaning of them. As the preacher of the Gita, and today India wants nothing better. The world wants nothing better than the method of interpretation. It is a wonder that subsequent interpreters of the scriptures, even commenting upon the Gita, many times could not catch the meaning, many times could not catch the drift. For what do you find in the Gita and what in modern commentators? One non-dualistic commentator takes up an Upanishad. There are so many dualistic passages, and he twists and tortures them into some meaning and wants to bring them all into a meaning of his own. If a dualistic commentator comes, there are so many non-dualistic texts which he begins to torture, to bring them all around to dualistic meaning. But you find in the Gita, there is no attempt at torturing any one of them. They are all right, says the Lord, for slowly and gradually the human soul rises up and up, step after step, from the gross to the fine, from the fine to the finer, until it reaches the absolute, the goal. That is what is in the Gita. Even the Karma Kanda is taken up, and it is shown that although it cannot give salvation direct, but only indirectly, yet that is also valid. Images are valid indirectly, ceremonies, forms, everything is valid only with one condition: purity of the heart. The Upanishads and the Gita are the true scriptures. The Gita is the gist of the Vedas. It is not our Bible. The Upanishads are our Bible. The Gita is the gist of the Upanishads and harmonizes the many contradictory parts of the Upanishads. For the whole gist of the Upanishads was contained in the Gita. The Gita takes the ideas of the Upanishads and, in some cases, the very words. They are strung together with the idea of bringing out in a compact, condensed, and systematic form the whole subject the Upanishads deal with. Now it is for us to see what there is in the Gita. If we study the Upanishads, we notice in wandering through the mazes of many irrelevant subjects, the sudden introduction of the discussion of a great truth, just as in the midst of a huge wilderness, a traveler unexpectedly comes across here and there an exquisitely beautiful rose with its leaves, thorns, roots all entangled. Compared with that, the Gita is like these truths, beautifully arranged together in their proper places, like a fine garland or a bouquet of the choicest flowers. In the more recent Upanishads, the spiritual ideas have been collected and brought into one place, as in the Bhagavad Gita, for instance, which we may perhaps look upon as the last of the Upanishads. You don't find any inkling of these ritualistic ideas. The Gita is like a bouquet composed of beautiful flowers of spiritual truths collected from the Upanishads. But in the Gita, you cannot study the rise of the spiritual ideas. You cannot trace them to their source. To do that, as has been pointed out by many, you must study the Vedas. Then, between the Upanishads and the Brahma Sutras or Vedanta Sutras, which are the systematizing of the marvelous truths of the Vedanta, comes in the Gita, the divine commentary of the Vedanta. The Upanishads, the Vyasa Sutras, and the Gita, therefore, have been taken up by every sect in India that wants to claim authority for orthodoxy, whether dualist or Vishishtadvaitist or Advaitist. The authorities of each of these are the three prasthanas, that is, Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, and Brahma Sutras. Either one hears the Advaita Keshari roaring in peals of thunder, the Asti, Bhati, and Priya, amidst the heart-stopping solemnities of the Himalayan forests, mixing with the solemn cadence of the river of heaven, or listens to the cooling of the Piya, Pitam, in the beautiful bowers of the grove of Vrinda. Whether one mingles with the sedate meditations of the monasteries of Varanasi or the ecstatic dances of the followers of the prophet of Nadia, whether one sits at the feet of the teacher of the Vishishtadvaita system with its Vatkale, Tenkale, and all the other subdivisions, or listens with reverence to the Acharya of the Madhava school, whether one hears the martial Wa Guru Ki Fatah of the secular Sikhs or the sermons on the Granth Sahib of the Udasis and Nirmalas, whether he salutes the Sannyasin disciples of Kabir with Sat Sahib and listens with joy to the Sakhis, the bhajans of Kabir, whether he pours upon the wonderful lore of that reformer of Rajputana, Dadu, or the works of his royal disciple Sundar Dasa, down to the great Nishal Dasa, the celebrated author of Vichar Sagar. Which book has more influence in India than any that has been written in any language within the last 3 centuries? If even one asks, the Bhangi method of northern India to sit down and give an account of the teachings of his Lal Guru, one will find that all these various teachers and schools have as their basis that system whose authority is the Shruti. Gita, its divine commentary, the Sharirak Sutras, its organized system, and all the different sects in India, from the Paramhansa Parivrajakacharyas to the poor despised Mehtar disciples of Lal Guru, are different manifestations. The three prasthanas, then in their different explanations as Dvaita, Vishishtadvaita or Advaita, with a few minor recensions from the authorities of the Hindu religion. The great glory of Shankaracharya was his preaching of the Gita. It is one of the greatest works that this great man did among the many noble works of his noble life. The preaching of the Gita and writing the most beautiful commentary upon it. And he has been followed by all founders of the orthodox sects in India, each of whom has written a commentary on the Gita. The Hindus visit foreign countries, Rangoon, Java, Hong Kong, Madagascar, Suez, Aden, Malta, and they take with them Ganga water and the Gita. The Gita and the sacred waters of the Ganga constitute the Hinduism of the Hindus. The Gita, no doubt, has already become the Bible of Hinduism, and it fully deserves to be so. The Gita is to the Hindus what the New Testament is to the Christians. There are a great many similarities in the teaching of the New Testament and the Gita. The human thought goes the same way. God is everywhere preached in the Gita. Hinduism is nothing without God. The Vedas are nothing without Him. The Gita and Lord Shri Krishna. Krishna can never be understood until you have studied the Gita, for he was the embodiment of his own teaching. Every one of these incarnations came as a living illustration of what they came to preach. Krishna, the preacher of the Gita, was all his life the embodiment of the song celestial. He was the great illustration of non-attachment. With every great prophet, his life is the only commentary. Look at his life. What he did will bear out the texts. Read the Gita and you will find that is exactly borne out by the life of the teacher, Lord Krishna. Shri Krishna spoke the Gita, establishing himself in the Atman. Those passages of the Gita where he speaks with the word I, invariably indicate the Atman. Take refuge in me alone means be established in the Atman. This knowledge of the Atman is the highest aim of the Gita. The references to yoga, etc., are but incidental to this realization of the Atman. Those who have not this knowledge of the Atman are suicides. They kill themselves by the clinging of the unreal. They lose their life in the noose of sense pleasures. You are also men, and can't you ignore this trash of sensual enjoyment that won't last for 2 days? Should you also swell the ranks of those who are born and die in utter ignorance? Accept the beneficial and discard the pleasant. Speak of this Atman to all, even to the lowest. By continued speaking, your own intelligence also will clear up. By continued speaking, your own intelligence also will clear up. And always repeat the great mantras Tattvamasi, thou art that. Sohamasmi, I am that. Sohamasmi, I am that. Sarvam khalvidam brahma. All this is verily Brahman. And have the courage of a lion in the heart. What is there to fear? Fear is death. Fear is the greatest sin. The human soul represented by Arjuna was touched with fear. Therefore, Bhagavan Shri Krishna, established in the Atman, spoke to him the teachings of the Gita. Still, his fear would not leave him. Later, when Arjuna saw the universal form of the Lord and became established in the Atman, then with all bondages of karma burnt by the fire of knowledge, he fought the battle. Now from his playful life at Vrindavan, come to the Krishna of Kurukshetra and see how that also is fascinating. How amidst all that horrible deed and uproar of fighting, Krishna remains calm, balanced, and peaceful. On the every battlefield, he is speaking the Gita to Arjuna and getting him on to fight, which is the dharma of a Kshatriya. Himself an agent to bring about this terrible warfare, Shri Krishna remains unattached to action. He did not take up arms. To whichsoever phase of it you look, you will find the character of Sri Krishna perfect, as if he was the embodiment of knowledge, work, devotion, power of concentration, and everything. In the present age, this aspect of Sri Krishna should be specially studied. Only contemplating the Krishna of Vrindavan with his flute unto nowadays. That will not bring salvation to humanity. Now is needed the worship of Sri Krishna, uttering the lion roar of the Gita, of Rama with his bows and arrows, of Mahavira, of Mother Kali. Then only will the people grow strong by going to work with great energy and will. Keep aside for the present the Vrindavan aspect of Sri Krishna and spread far and wide the worship of Sri Krishna, roaring the Gita out with the voice of a lion, and bring into daily use the worship of Shakti, the Divine Mother, the source of all power. Bhagavad Gita, a source of strength. The Gita, that wonderful poem without one note in it of weakness or unmanliness. First of all, our young men must be strong. Religion will come afterwards. Be strong, my young friends. That is my advice to you. You will be nearer to heaven through football than through the study of the Gita. These are bold words, but I have to say them, for I love you. I know where the shoe pinches. I have gained a little experience. You will understand the Gita better with your biceps, your muscles a little stronger. You will understand the mighty genius and mighty strength of Krishna better with a little of strong blood in you. Now it won't do to merely quote the authority of our ancient books. The tidal wave of Western civilization is now rushing over the length and breadth of the country. It won't do now simply to sit in meditation on mountain tops without realizing in the least its usefulness. Now is wanted, as said in the Gita by the Lord, intense karma yoga with unbounded courage and indomitable strength in the heart. Then only will the people of the country be roused. Otherwise, they will continue to be as much in the dark as you are. Ought one to seek an opportunity of death in defense of right, or ought one to take the lesson of the Gita and learn never to react? The Swami was asked this question, and he replied, I am for no reaction, said Swami Vivekananda, speaking slowly and with a long pause. Then he added, for sannyasins, self-defense for the householder. He repeats, no reaction only for the sannyasins, but self-defense for the garhastas, the householders. Means the householder must defend, must act in defense to protect his or her honor and rights. The following paragraph is Sister Nivedita's notes of a great work. The following paragraph is Sister Nivedita's notes of a New York Bhagavad Gita class recorded in a June 16, 1900 later to Miss Josephine MacLeod. Quote, this morning the lesson on the Gita was grand. It began with a long talk on the fact that the highest ideals are not for all. Non-resistance is not for the man who thinks the replacing of the maggot in the wound by the leprous scent with eat, brother, disgusting and horrible. Non-resistance is practiced by a mother's love towards an angry child. It is a travesty in the mouth of a coward or in the face of a lion. Unquote. General teachings of the Gita as viewed by Swami Vivekananda. The reconciliation of the different paths of dharma and work without desire or attachment, these are the two special characteristics of the Bhagavad Gita. In Krishna, we find two ideas stand supreme in his mention In Krishna, we find two ideas stand supreme in his message. The first is the harmony of different ideas, the second is non attachment. A man can attain to perfection, the highest goal, sitting on a throne, commanding armies, working out big plans for nations. In fact, Krishna's great sermon was preached on the battlefield. Harmony of paths, harmony of various paths of the different philosophies. The tendency of the Hindu is not to destroy, but to harmonize everything. If any new idea comes into India, we don't antagonize it, but simply try to take it in, to harmonize it, because this method was taught first by our prophet, God incarnate on earth, Lord Sri Krishna. This incarnation of God preached himself first. I am the God incarnate. I am the inspirer of all books. I am the inspirer of all religions. Thus we do not reject any. Now let us see some of the main points discussed in the Gita. Wherein lies the originality of the Gita, which distinguishes it from all preceding scriptures? It is this: though before its advent, yoga, jnana yoga, bhakti yoga, etc., had each its strong adherents, they all quarrelled among themselves, each claiming superiority for its own chosen path. No one ever tried to seek for reconciliation among these different paths. It was the author of the Gita who, for the first time, tried to harmonize these. He took the best from what all the sects then existing had to offer and threaded them in the Gita. But even where Krishna failed to show a complete reconciliation among these warring sects, it was fully accomplished by Ramakrishna Paramahansa in this 19th century. The reconciliation of the different paths of dharma and work without desire or attachment. These are the true special characteristics of the Gita. When the Gita was first preached, there was then going on a great controversy between two sects. One party considered the Vedic yajnas and animal sacrifices and such like karmas to constitute the whole of religion. The other preached that the killing of numberless horses and cattle cannot be called religion. The people belonging to the latter party were mostly sannyasins and followers of jnana. They believed that the giving up of all work and gaining of the knowledge of the self was the only path to moksha. By the preaching of his great doctrine of work without motive, the author of the Gita, Lord Krishna, set at rest the disputes of these two antagonistic sects of Hinduism. Ancient India had for centuries been the battlefield for the ambitious projects of two of her foremost classes, the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas. On the one hand, the priesthood stood between the lawless social tyranny of the princes over the masses, whom the Kshatriyas declared to be their legal food. On the other hand, the Kshatriyas' power was the one potent force which struggled with any success against the spiritual tyranny of the priesthood and the ever increasing chain of ceremonials which they were forging to bind down the people with. The tug of war began in the earliest periods of the history of our race, and throughout the Shrutis it can be distinctly traced. A momentary lull came when Sri Krishna, leading the faction of Kshatriya power and of Jnana, showed the way to reconciliation. The result was the teachings of the Gita, the essence of philosophy, of liberality, of religion. Yet the causes were there and the effect must follow. On the one hand, the majority of the priests, impelled by economical considerations, were bound to defend that form of religion which made their existence a necessity of society and assigned them the highest place in the scale of caste. On the other hand, the king caste, whose strong right hand guarded and guided the nation, and who now found itself as leading in the higher thoughts also, were loath to give up the first place to men who only knew how to conduct a ceremonial. There were then others recruited from both the priests and king castes who ridiculed equally the ritualists and philosophers, declared spiritualism as fraud and priestcraft, and upheld the attainment of material comforts as the highest goal of life. People tired of ceremonials and wondering at the philosophers joined in masses the materialists. This was the beginning of that caste question and that triangular fight in India between ceremonials, philosophy, and materialism, which has come down unsolved to our own days. The first solution of the difficulty attempted was by applying the eclecticism which from the earliest days had taught the people to see in differences the same truth in various garbs. The great leader of this school, Lord Krishna, himself of royal race, and his sermon, the Bhagavad Gita, have, after various vicissitudes brought about by the upheavals of the Jains, the Buddhists, and other sects, fairly established themselves as the prophet of India and the truest philosophy of life. Though the tension was toned down for the time, it did not satisfy the social wants. Though the tension between the various sects was toned down for the time, it did not satisfy the social wants which were among the causes. The claim of the king race to stand first in the scale of caste and the popular intolerance of priestly privilege. Krishna had opened the gates of spiritual knowledge and attainment to all irrespective of sex or caste, but he left undisturbed the same problem on the social side. So the great struggle began in India, and it comes to one of its culminating points in the Gita, when it was causing fear that all India was going to be broken up between the two groups. There arose this man, Krishna, and in the Gita he tries to reconcile the ceremony and the philosophy of the priests and the people. In the Gita, the way is laid open to all men and women, to all caste and color. Nishkam karma, the work without attachments, as expounded by Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita. Nishkam karma. You who have read the Gita see all through the book that the one idea is non attachments. Remain unattached. Unattachment is the heart and soul. The philosophy of unattachment taught by Lord Krishna in Bhagavad Gita is the heart and soul of Bhagavad Gita. The greatest contribution of Bhagavad Gita to the mankind. Now let us see some of the main points discussed in the Gita. The next is Nishkam Karma, or work without desire or attachments. People nowadays understand what is meant by this in various ways. Some say what is implied by being unattached is to become purposeless. If that were its real meaning, then heartless brutes and the wolves would be the best exponents of the performance of Nishkam Karma. Many others again give the example of Janaka and wish themselves to be equally recognized as past masters in the practice of Nishkam Karma. Janaka did not acquire that distinction by bringing forth children, but these people all want to be Janakas with the sole qualification of being the fathers of a brood of children. No, the true Niskam Karmi, performer of work without desire, is neither to be like a brute, nor to be inert, nor heartless. He is not tamasic, but of pure sattva. His heart is so full of love and sympathy that he can embrace the whole world with his love. The world at large cannot generally comprehend his all embracing love and sympathy. Now, what is the meaning of working without motive? Nowadays, many understand it in the sense that one is to work in such a way that neither pleasure nor pain touches his mind. If this be its real meaning, then the animals might be said to work without motive. Some animals devour their own offspring and they don't feel any pangs at all in doing so. The serpents do that, the cobra does that. They eat up their own eggs, the children. Robbers ruin other people by robbing them of their possessions, but if they feel quite callous to pleasure or pain, then they also would be working without motive. If the meaning of it be such, then one who has a stony heart, the worst of criminals, might be considered to be working without motive. The walls have no feelings of pleasure or pain, neither has a stone, and it cannot be said that they are working without motive. In the above sense, the doctrine is a potent instrument in the hands of the wicked. They would go on doing wicked things and would pronounce themselves as working without a motive. If such be the significance of working without a motive, then a fearful doctrine has been put forth by the preaching of the Gita. Certainly, this is not the meaning. Furthermore, if we look into the lives of those who are connected with the preaching of the Gita, we should find them living quite a different life. Arjuna killed Bhishma and Drona in battle, but without he sacrificed all his self-interest and desires and his lower self millions of times. Gita teaches Karma Yoga. We should work through yoga, concentration. In such concentration in action, that is Karma Yoga, there is no consciousness of the lower ego present. The consciousness that I am doing this and that is never present when one walks through yoga. The Western people don't understand this. They say that if there is no consciousness of the ego, if this ego is gone, how then can a man walk? But when one walks with concentration, losing all consciousness of oneself, the work that is done will be infinitely better, and this everyone may have experienced in his own life. We perform many works subconsciously, such as the digestion of food, etc., many others consciously, and others again by becoming immersed in samadhi, as it were, when there is no consciousness of the smaller ego, the individual ego. If the painter, losing the consciousness of his ego, becomes completely immersed in his painting, he will be able to produce masterpieces. The good cook concentrates his whole self on the food material he handles. He loses all other consciousness for the time being, but they are only able to do perfectly a single work in this way to which they are habituated. The Gita teaches that all works should be done thus. He who is one with the Lord through yoga performs all his works by becoming immersed in concentration and does not seek any personal benefit. Such a performance of work brings only good to the world. No evil can come out of it. Those who work thus never do anything for themselves. We say that we cannot do good without at the same time doing some evil, or do evil without doing some good. Knowing this, how can we work? There have therefore been sects in this world who have, in an astoundingly preposterous way, preached slow suicide as the only means to get out of the world. Because if a man lives, he has to kill poor little animals and plants or do injury to something or someone. So according to them, the only way out of the world is to die. The Jains have preached this doctrine as their highest ideal. This teaching seems to be very logical, but the true solution is found in the Gita. It is the theory of non attachment, to be attached to nothing while doing our work of life. Know that you are separated entirely from the world, though you are in the world, and that whatever you may be doing in it, you are not doing that for your own sake. For in the Gita, Shri Krishna says, men should work for work's sake only and love for love's sake. Bhakti, devotion, devotion to the Lord, devotion to the Absolute, devotion to the Supreme Self. The Upanishads deal elaborately with Shraddha, devotion, in many places, but hardly mention Bhakti. In the Gita, on the other hand, the subject of Bhakti, the devotion, is not only again and again dealt with, but in it, the innate spirit of Bhakti has attained its culmination. If you want to be a Bhakta, it is not at all necessary for you to know whether Krishna was born in Mathura or in Braja, what he was doing, or just the exact date on which he pronounced the teachings of the Gita. You only require to feel the craving for the beautiful lessons of duty and love in the Gita. All the other particulars about it and its author are for the enjoyment of the learned. So says Krishna in the Gita. The Lord is the only one who never changes. His love never fails. Wherever we are and whatever we do, He is ever and ever the same merciful, the same loving heart. He never changes. He is never angry. Whatever we do, how can God be angry with us? Your baby does many mischievous things. Are you angry with that baby? Doesn't God know what we are going to be? He knows we are all going to be perfect sooner or later. He has patience, infinite patience. We must love Him and everyone that lives only in and through Him. This is the keynote. To obtain bhakti, seek the company of holy men who have bhakti and read books like the Gita and the Imitation of Christ. Always think of the attributes of God. Most of the utterances and comments of Swami Vivekananda are addressed to the Western audience in America. Bear in this mind. So, when he is referring to the Imitation of Christ, he is addressing a predominantly Christian audience in America and Europe. Jnana Yoga. Jnana is taught very clearly by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. This great poem is held to be the crown jewel of all Indian literature. It is a kind of commentary on the Vedas. It shows us that our battle for spirituality must be fought out in this life, so we must not flee from it, but rather compel it to give us all that it holds. The Gita typifies this struggle for higher things. It is highly poetical to lay the scene in a battlefield. Krishna, in the guise of a charioteer to Arjuna, leader of one of the opposing armies, urges him not to be sorrowful, not to fear death, since he knows he is immortal, that nothing which changes can be in the real nature of man. Through chapter after chapter, Krishna teaches the higher truths of philosophy and religion to Arjuna. It is these teachings which make this poem so wonderful. Practically, the whole of the Vedanta philosophy is included in them. The sloka, the verses of the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna, the Lord of Souls, talks to Arjuna or Gudakesha, Lord of Sleep, he who has conquered sleep. The field of virtue, the battlefield is this world. The 5 brothers representing righteousness fight the 100 other brothers, all that we love and have to contend against. The most heroic brother, Arjuna, the awakened soul, is the general of the Pandava army. We have to fight all sense delights, the things to which we are most attached, to kill them. We have to stand alone. We are Brahman. All other ideas must be merged in this one. Wisdom can be practiced even on a battlefield. The Gita was preached so. preached on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, a world war of the ancient time. Greatness and influence of the Gita. Swami Vivekananda on the greatness and influence of the Gita. The greatest incident of the Mahabharat war was the marvelous and immortal poem of the Bhagavad Gita, the Song Celestial. It is the popular scripture of India and the loftiest of all teachings. Repeat, listen carefully. It is the popular scripture of India and the loftiest of all teachings. It consists of a dialogue held by Arjuna with Krishna just before the commencement of the fight on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. I would advise those of you who have not read this book to read it. If you only knew how much it has influenced your own country even. Swami Vivekananda is then addressing Americans and he is saying that Bhagavad Gita has tremendous influence in your own country, the Western world he is referring to. If you only knew how much it has influenced your own country even. If you want to know the source of Emerson's inspiration, it is this book, the Gita. Emerson was the leader of the great movement that arose in America in 19th century, the Transcendentalist movement. And Emerson was the first person in America who got translated Bhagavad Gita, Vishnu Puran and some of the Upanishads. He was a great self-realized master. Emerson's story is so inspiring. I also read a lot. Swami Ramatirtha also used to quote a lot, and he was so deeply influenced. Swami Ramatirtha used to say that Emerson was one of the greatest self-realized masters of the Advaita Vedanta variety and tradition. The same is being repeated and said by Swami Vivekananda also. If you want to know the source of Emerson's inspiration, it is this book, the Gita. Emerson was teacher and guru of Thoreau, the great philosopher. And Thoreau's even philosophy on politics, all this is taught even in Indian universities, the students of politics, sociology and economics and the higher classes. If you want to know the source of Emerson's inspiration, it is this book, the Bhagavad Gita. He went to see Carlyle and Carlyle made him a present of the Gita. And that little book is responsible for the Concord movement. The same is known as Transcendentalist movement also. It was inspired by the basic tenets of Sanatana Dharma, eternal, immortal, transcendentalist movements they used to call. That was one of the most powerful political, social, cultural, philosophical movement in USA in 19th century. It deeply influenced the way the Americans behave and live and think today, even in the modern times. This little book is responsible for the Concord movement in the USA, America. All the broad movements in America, in one way or other, are indebted to the Concord Party that was led by Emerson, who was inspired, deeply inspired by Bhagavad Gita. First, see the irony of it. Jesus Christ, the God of the Europeans, has taught, have no enemy, bless them that curse you. Whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also. Stop all your work and be ready for the next world. The end of the world is near at hand. And our Lord in the Gita is saying, always work with great enthusiasm, destroy your enemies and enjoy the world. But after all, it turned out to be exactly the reverse of what Christ or Krishna implied. The Europeans never took the words of Jesus Christ seriously, always of acting habits, being possessed of a tremendous rajasic nature. They are gathering with great enterprise and youthful ardor the comforts and luxury of the different countries of the world and enjoying them to their heart's content. And we are sitting in a corner with our bag and baggage, pondering on death day and night, and saying, Nalini dalagata jalamati taralam tadjivanamati shaya chapalam. Very tremulous and unsteady is the water of the lotus leaf, so is the life of man frail and transient, with the result that it is making our blood run cold and our flesh creep with the fear of Yama, the god of death. The god of death. The Yama too, alas, has taken us at our word, as it were. Plague and all sorts of maladies have entered into our country, who are following the teachings of the Gita, the Europeans, and who are acting according to the will of Jesus Christ, the descendants of Sri Krishna. Strange, strange. Take the Sermon on the Mount and the Gita, they are simplicity itself. Even the street walker can understand them. How grand in them you find the truth clearly and simply revealed. The restless Western atheist or agnostic finds in the Gita or in the Dharmapada the only place where his soul can anchor. As a character, Buddha was the greatest the world has ever seen. Next to him, Christ. But the teachings of Krishna as taught in the Bhagavad Gita are the grandest the world has ever known. He who wrote that wonderful poem was one of those rare souls whose life He who wrote that wonderful poem was one of those rarest souls whose lives sent a wave of regeneration through the world. Human race will never again see such a brain as his who wrote the Gita, Lord Krishna. Well, now great things are to be done. Who cares for great things? Why not do small things as well? One is as good as the other. The greatness of little things, that is what the Gita teaches. Bless the old book. Bless the old book. The less you read, the better. Read the Gita and other good works of Vedanta. That is all you need. Swami Vivekananda in conclusion says, and this has to be remembered by every Indian, especially every Sanatan Dharmi, the less you read, the better. Read the Gita and other good works on Vedanta. That is all you need. That is all you need. This was the introduction of the Bhagavad Gita in the words of Swami Vivekananda. Now it concludes. यत्र योगेश्वरः कृष्णो यत्र पार्थो धनुर्धरः तत्र श्रीविजयोर्भूति ध्रुवा नीतिर्मम मतिर्मम ॐ श्रीकृष्णचन्द्राय नमः।